So behind me is the house where it all began. This is where I grew up as a baby and as a toddler, and it's number 68 Sandmere Road. I'm sure it had a green door when I first lived here, but yeah, I was here with my mum and dad on a flat on the ground floor till I was about 4, and then they separated, and then I went to live with my dad in Brixton. So behind me across the road is, I guess, where it all began. This was the first house I ever lived in and grew up in as a baby. Lived here till I was about 4 or so when my mum and dad divorced, and then went to basically live with my dad. So we left here, so this is Clapham, or Clapham North train station, or tube station's the nearest station. We're not that far from Clapham Common here, and yeah, this is basically where it all started. I grew up here with my mum and dad. They separated. I then went to live with my dad in Brixton, in Cowley Estate, and various other places where I was looked after by family and friends, etc. And my mum carried on living here till I was about 9 or so. So yeah, I used to come back here when I was living with my dad. I would come back here and stay with my mum and for weekends. So she lived here till I was about 9 and then she moved from here to Barking, which is in East London. But yeah, this is it's very different. I'm pretty sure the door was green when I lived in it. We lived in a flat on the ground floor. We had an outside loo. I have a ghost story, but I won't tell you. But there's a ghost story that haunts me from this very street. And streets off this particular area, we're not too far from Stockwell, was basically where my mum kind of grew up as well. My mum's originally from North London, but she came here when she was a youngster, and her dad, or my granddad, used to be a caretaker in a school not far from here, just around the corner actually. So yes, this is where it all began. An interesting story about the house behind me, number 68, was when I ended up working in living in Cross Hospital. I did an opera season. It was an opera season with a company called Broomhill, and one of the stage managers that I was talking to one evening after one of the shows, getting quite drunk, as you do, you start talking about where you lived, things that you used to do, etc, etc. And I asked her where she lived, and it turned out that she lived here at number 68 Sandmere Road, in the very flat that I actually grew up in. So what were the chances of that, eh? So behind me is Stodmarsh House. Now Stodmarsh House was where I went to live circa 74, 75. So left Clapham, and this is where I came to live with my dad properly. In between that there was Nursery Road, where I used to spend a lot of time with my aunt and my cousins, and there was other sort of places that I lived. There was a bedsit off Clapham Common that I remember living in with my dad for a while. An apartment block somewhere. Can't remember where that was, but I'm sure I used to be babysat there now and then. But behind me here, number 15 I think it was, Stodmarsh House, was where I sort of grew up with my dad and his new wife then, so hence learnt to speak Spanish because she was Spanish and didn't speak any English at the time, and used to go to my infant school and first junior school. I used to walk from here by myself quite a lot of the times, and in fact where I'm filming this now, it's very weird because all of this is now open parks and new apartments and everything, but this was just wasteland way back when. I remember looking out my bedroom window and seeing this just as a wasteland, and then the guys and the builders coming in and starting to build something at one point, I think. This was also under the flight path of Heathrow, so I think this is probably where I got my sort of liking for aviation and everything. I used to run out onto the balcony to see Concorde come over every now and then. Yeah, there was some reasonably happy times here. Sort of splashed in with a bit of dicey stuff as well. And then on this estate, so this is Cowley Estate, from here we then moved literally just 2 blocks along, closer to the Brixton Road, and we went and lived in Moira House. And so yeah, I basically lived on this estate until I was about 9.5, 10, and then made the move from South London all the way across to East London.
So just to add a little footnote here, I had recorded this but the camera shat the bed. Seeing the fire brigades around here was a common occurrence. People would set fire to the rubbish chutes, cars were set alight, etc. You know, it was that kind of a state. So one day, coming back from a shopping trip with my dad and a friend of his, we saw the fire brigade. Unfortunately, this time they were coming out of our flat, having put a fire out. When we got in, we found that the kitchen was totally destroyed. The hallway blackened, the bathroom, the toilet completely covered in soot, etc. I think the sitting room and the 2 bedrooms were okay. But yeah, a very nearly destroyed home due to the fact that my dad found it more important to go hi-fi shopping. I think my stepmother at the time may have been in hospital expecting Adriana, my sister. So yeah, one of the homes that was nearly destroyed by a fire.
Right, so behind me, this is Moira House. I lived in number 9 Moira House. This was after Stodmarsh House. We're on the Brixton Road here. This is the A23, which takes you to Brighton. And this was the last place that I lived in Brixton. From here, the sad day of my dad taking me into the kitchen and telling me essentially, that he didn't want me anymore and I was now going to live with my mum. So I left South London from this point and moved to East London to Barking and went to live with my mum. I was about just approaching 10 at the time. But yeah, this was the last of Brixton, but I used to come back here to see my dad. You get used to hearing that sound a lot living on this street, and but yeah, I would come back and visit my dad and stuff like that. But yeah, this is kind of, I guess, really, this point was the end of my childhood from here. And I moved on to a different stage of my life and went into secondary education, etc. So that's the end of this little snippet for you. I'll give you a little pan round so you can see some red buses. House is it used to overlook the, well, it still does overlook the Brixton Road, which is the A23, which is the road that takes you to Brighton. So every year there used to be the rally of old cars that used to go along, and I used to look forward to seeing all these old bangers sort of like clatter along here. But when I used to come back here to visit my dad when I was now living with my mum, and I would come here occasional weekends, it was back in 1981, I think it was, but this was the hotbed for a lot of activity that happened in the Brixton riots, and this Brixton Road in front of me was just a parade of police cars, fire trucks, ambulances, you name it. And I remember sort of venturing into Brixton, which is only sort of like a 10-15 minute walk from here, with my dad, and seeing all of the blockades across the road and all the burnt out cars and barricades that all the rioters had caused and stuff like that. But a lot of it was sort of focused on this particular estate as well, so there was a lot of angst going on and a lot of energy in this place at the time, and that's a memory that sort of sticks with me for a long time. Another story from Cowley Estate is that behind me is the bus stop where I used to pick up the bus, and I'm old enough to remember when buses were the open back, which you used to jump onto, and it used to be 2p was my bus fare from this very bus stop outside Cowley Estate to get me into Brixton town, and then could go to school. In latter days I used to just sort of walk to school, but yeah, this bus stop was where I used to get my 2p bus fare into town. Right, so here we are outside 24 Covent Gardens, and basically this was another very short chapter back in London, trying my hand at something which unfortunately didn't pan out. So I left Glasgow, came back to London, and this house behind me with the scaffolding I shared with my best mate and his girlfriend. I was here for about a year. I decided for whatever reason that I wanted to sort of give the theatre industry a bit of a miss, and due to its proximity to London Heathrow Airport and everything, I decided to try and change and do like a career change and go into the aviation industry. Applied for all kinds of jobs at the airport, but was unsuccessful. Suffered the humiliating year of being unemployed, the humiliation of having to do back to work training, etc, etc. And after about a year, or just under a year, I decided enough was enough. Let's go back to what I do best, which is working in the theatre industry, and applied for jobs through the Stage newspaper. 2 of them came up, 2 offered me a position. I chose one over the other, and that one being Christ Hospital, which was then another chapter. So this is a very brief encounter. The first time that I ever lived in West London. It's very nice out this part, and there were some okay times here, but it was quite difficult, to be honest, because I was unemployed, so wasn't able to fulfill and have as much of a sort of liberating time or a good time as I wanted.
The place has changed somewhat. There's scaffolding, unfortunately. So obviously the place has changed. The boarded up downstairs bay window was my room basically, and this building to the right behind the gates, that didn't exist. That was just an old playground, I think. I think that might be the convent behind there. I think that's now a school or something like that, but this building didn't exist. Yeah, I used to sit in that window and watch the planes go by, because we're on the flight path to Heathrow Airport here. And yeah, it's changed somewhat. I'll try and add some photos or different images without the scaffolding if I can find it on Google Earth. But yeah, here we are, 24 Convent Gardens. This dress behind me was basically me trying out new things, and this is where I embarked on a I want to say singing career. It wasn't a singing career, but singing in the band. So the band I was in with my best mates at the time, all of that kind of was during the year that I was in this place here. We did various gigs around London, etc, etc, but this was kind of like the start of it in this very house here. And I used to leave here with my best mate Steve, and we'd walk up to the station and go to band practice in Acton, etc. Yeah, living the dream that never actually happened. But yeah, another little short story from 24 Convent Gardens.